True Crime Loser is filmed in front of a live studio audience. All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Loser. I hope you're doing well. So, folks, today we're going to talk about Nicholas Alahverdian, also known as Nicholas Rossi, also known as, sort of, Arthur Knight. This story is the definition of one for the books. It's been crawling through the justice system for the past 18 months at the speed of a dead snail, but finally, 2 weeks ago, a major decision was made. I think things are going to really start rolling now. And folks, as they do, we are in store for some truly unbelievable, unforgettable scenes. It's going to be a circus. There is no bottom to how far Nicholas Alahverdian is willing to reduce himself to escape these charges, to the point, while I was putting this episode together, all of a sudden, out of the blue, it hit me like a rubber club to the back of the head. Wait a second. Wait. Is Nicholas Alahverdian the most pathetic person in the world? Not exaggerating to be funny, that's a hell of a title, but actually. I made some criteria and I've been thinking about it for a couple days. I think he might be the one. If there was an ultimate pathetic person championship, I think Nicholas Alahverdian would be a contender for the heavyweight pathetic champion of the world. I'm going to quickly set it up so we can talk about what happened recently 2 weeks ago, and then we'll go back and talk about some of the more ridiculous parts of this truly wild story that's about to get nuts. All right, so here we go. Nicholas Alahverdian is a convicted sex offender. He's a domestic abuser. He's an identity thief. He's a credit card fraudster, and he's a pitiful, litigious rat of a man. In 2017, he's about 30 years old. His wife, who he abused, had just left him. He was wanted, and still is, by the authorities in Utah for 2 rape charges. He's wanted by the FBI for $200,000 worth of fraudulent credit card charges. And he's wanted by the authorities in Rhode Island, where he spent most of his life working with state politics in Rhode Island. He has the right cocktail of severe mental disorders where he was immediately drawn to politics. He's perfect for it. So he did a lot of work with state Rhode Island politics. And so, but he's wanted, the authorities in Rhode Island figure out, hey, this person is supposed to be registered as a sex offender, and he's not. So, feeling the walls closing in from 3 different law enforcement agencies, Nicholas Alahverdian uses one of his many aliases and books a one-way ticket to the UK and slinks out of the country. He immediately, when he gets to the UK, calls some acquaintances who don't even really like him at this point at the State House from his days working with politics in Rhode Island to put out misinformation that he went to Russia. So he calls old state representative that he knew and worked with, and the state representative goes, Nicholas, what are you doing? I'm hearing about how you're wanted for rape charges and you're wanted by the FBI. What is going on? And Nicholas Alahverdian in the UK is going, no, it's just a big misunderstanding. But anyway, they're never going to find me because I went to Russia. So he purposely made a point to put out the misinformation. I went to Russia. If anybody asks, I am in Russia. But the authorities kind of knew he was in the UK trying to figure it out. And then he did what he does a lot of the times in order to change names and to try to leave the Nicholas Alahverdian, alleged rapist, sex offender, leave that identity behind. He meets a woman in the UK, Mrs. Knight, and I would assume the plan was, all right, we'll get married. I'll change my name to Mr. Knight, Arthur Knight, and we'll fake the death of Nicholas Alahverdian and make it look like he's gone. There's no point for any of these international law enforcement, the American authorities, no point to look for old Alahverdian anymore. He is dead. And so how he did that was he called the same acquaintances, the state rep, couple people in the Rhode Island politics, and he said, "Rep, it's me, Nicholas Alahverdian. I have terrible news. I have lymphoma and I am going to die." And the state rep knew he was completely full of it and a prolific liar and said, "Nicholas, you're not dying. You're a cockroach. Cockroaches don't die." And he goes, "No, Rep, I am. Why are you being like that? I just want to have closure and end on a good note. I really am dying." And he's like, "No, you're not. No one believes you. Whatever you say, Nicholas Alahverdian, you're full of it." But then Nicholas Alahverdian fakes the big death and he puts out an obituary online, which anybody that knows Nicholas Alahverdian read it and said, "Nick is not dead. He definitely wrote his own obituary." Here's my favorite part from the obituary that seems like he definitely wrote for himself. "At his bedside were Mrs. Alahverdian," there wasn't a Mrs. Alahverdian, "their 2 children and extended family. His last words were, 'Fear not and run towards the bliss of the sun.' At the time of his passing, the room was filled with the sounds of the end credits for the 1997 film Contact by composer Alan Silvestri, a film and score which held special meaning for Mr. Alahverdian." And then the new woman, Mrs. Knight, that he met in the UK that wanted to marry this guy, she then calls churches and stuff in Rhode Island and says, "I am the widow of Nicholas Alahverdian. My loving husband has passed away." She's pretending. "And we would like you to do," he loved Rhode Island, "we would like you to do a big funeral." And the priest at the church in Rhode Island is going, "All right, yeah, we could maybe do a funeral. He did live here, and all right." But then she started making ridiculous requests like, "Okay, well, would you mind having a full symphony orchestra as part of the funeral?" And the priest is going, "Who's got the money for that?" And also, it's delusional because if you had a full symphony orchestra, no one liked Nicholas. No one respected him. He had no dignity. So I would guess that if they would have had the funeral with the full symphony orchestra, there would have been probably 3 times as many people in the band as in the audience. But the priest is going, "Okay, yeah, we'll do this funeral," and they're kind of setting it up, and then law enforcement contacts the priest and goes, "Don't do the funeral. He's still alive. You're being played. Don't do the funeral. Hang tight. We're closing in on him. We think he's in the UK." But the big plan was, all right, Nicholas is dead. Check out the obituary. It's online. The information is in Rhode Island. He's gone. No need for the authorities to look him up anymore. Now we have Arthur Knight, who Arthur Knight's story is he was an Irish orphan named Nicholas, I think Brown, but he was bullied and he wanted to get rid of the name Nicholas, so he changed it to Arthur when he married Mrs. Knight, and he made it Arthur Knight. And so the story was an Irish orphan that spent most of his time in northern England and then married Mrs. White, became Arthur Knight, and then they lived in Scotland. Okay, well, at the end, he faked his death in 2020. So he slinked off to the UK in 2017. The fake death was in 2020. Right at the end of 21, beginning of 22, something happened. Old Nicholas Alahverdian got a bad case of COVID. And this part's very interesting to me. Think about, you're on the run, you're an international alleged rapist, the walls are closing in, you tried to fake your own death, and then all of a sudden you got COVID, and then it's getting worse, and it's getting worse, and he's not in too good a shape. So that makes you more susceptible to COVID. And as it's getting worse, I'm sure him and his new wife, Mrs. Knight, were kind of freaking out because it's going, what if I have to go to the hospital? The case is getting bad. If I got to go to the hospital, they're going to want to know who I am, and we got to do a believable story. Well, the COVID gets bad enough, he has to go to the main hospital in Scotland. I think Glasgow is the name of the hospital. Anyway, he goes to the main hospital and goes, "My name is Arthur Knight, and I'm here with COVID." And the COVID case gets really bad to the point where they got to put him on a ventilator, and he goes into a coma. Well, hospitals, they don't like funny stories about who you are. They want to know, all right, who are you? You got to prove your identity. So while Nicholas Alahverdian is in a coma on a ventilator, It's probably the most the world has been at peace since he's been alive. The people at the hospital start looking into it. All right, the story about Arthur Knight doesn't sound that doesn't sound believable. They look into it, they talk to Interpol and figure out this is Nicholas Alahverdian. Nicholas Alahverdian probably has the worst tattoos I've ever seen on his arms, which when he got arrested for being a sex offender, they took pictures of everything and he had his fingerprints. So they go check the tattoos. They sent the people at the hospital pictures of his tattoos, and voila, it's him in Scotland pretending to be Arthur Knight. And so he's in a coma, I think, for months. Probably wish he would have died. But he wakes up from the coma, and at the beginning of 2022, Nicholas Alahverdian is arrested, and the whole process of identifying him as not Arthur Knight and Nicholas Alahverdian, and then the extradition process starts, beginning of 2022. Apparently, Scotland has the slowest, most meticulous extradition process of basically anywhere in the world, I found out. But the first decision that needed to be legally decided by the courts was, is this Nicholas Alahverdian or is this Arthur Knight, an innocent Irish orphan that's just trying to live his life with his nice wife, Mrs. Knight? And is this just a mistaken identity? Think about how horrifying it was if you're just a normal person living your life, trying to keep on keeping on. Then all of a sudden you're arrested and they deem you this rapist from another country. And you're going, no, it's not me. You have the wrong guy. It's a mistaken identity. Don't send me away. I'm living my life. I'm not Nicholas Alahverdian. I'm not him, please. So it's not it's serious business to decide legally, is this Arthur Knight or is this Nicholas Alahverdian? You can't screw it up. And it took 10 months. And they arrested him, they put him in jail, then he got out. And even though he's my age, he's using the tactic. Starting in 2022 when they arrested him for the hospital, he immediately started doing what you see like old men that are arrested for some cold case, like some murder back in the 70s. A strategy that they do to try to keep themselves out of jail is pretty much act so sick and old and pathetic and borderline unconscious to where the judge has the feeling, this person you can't send this person to jail. Whatever the sentence will be, we'll do house arrest, or look how old. So that's why you see the old guys that are in the cold case. They're fine, living their life, driving cars, doing everything, and all of a sudden they get arrested for the cold case, and then all of a sudden they're in a wheelchair, and they're drooling on themselves, and they're pretending to be sad and pathetic and unconscious, and just trying to get the judge to be like, all right, yeah, there's no way we can send this old, frail, sick, unconscious man to jail. But hilariously, Nicholas Alahverdian isn't old, but that's what he tried to do. After he was arrested, he claimed that because of long COVID, his legs no longer worked, so he got himself what looks like a 1,200-pound electric wheelchair that he vrooms and zooms around in. And there's something a little irksome about the way he zooms and vrooms all around, but he gets the heaviest wheelchair possible. And then also he wears a totally unnecessary, from what I've seen from medical professionals in the comments, he wears a full-on oxygen mask with a giant bag. And so what he's doing is a medical professional at the jail has come out and said there is no medical or scientific reason why his legs don't work. He's pretending his legs don't work. They are strong and athletic legs. There's no scientific reason. And also, they're saying there's no reason that he needs the oxygen at all times. But if you're trying to not be deemed as the rapist in another country, he's trying to hide his identity as much as he possibly can. So he's always wearing the oxygen mask and glasses and a hat pulled down, and he's got himself fat as a pig, sitting in his giant 1,200-pound wheelchair just to make it as hard as possible to do anything with them. The scenes of him being arrested, they have ramps down the house and the heavy wheelchair, and then they're trying to get the wheelchair into the police van, and they pick him up, and he's pretending his legs don't work, and the whole thing is just totally absurd. But in that 10 months where the court is deciding, is this Arthur Knight the innocent Irish orphan, or is this Nicholas Alahverdian the alleged rapist from America? Nicholas Alahverdian took every interview that he could. Even at one point, because he's getting swarmed by the press, he got himself a little press microphone, and he said, I'll be the one asking the questions now. And he's like zooming around in his wheelchair and has his microphone, and he's trying to ask the press for questions. But during that 10 months, he accepts pretty much any interview that wants to interview him. Any interest, any media or journalist that wants to interview him, he accepts. And so they go over to his house, and it's his wife always sitting next to him, and he's sitting in his big giant wheelchair with the oxygen mask. Where's my hat? Or he's like, I was gonna do like an impression of what he does, but he wears sunglasses and he wears the big giant oxygen mask. You can like barely see his face. Why does no one believe me? I am Arthur Knight. And he's talking in this ridiculous accent, and one of the things he says is he goes, I want my life back. My wife can't even walk down the pavement to grab a pint of milk. And people in the comments of the interviews are going, I was born and raised in the UK. Nobody says my wife can't even walk down the pavement to get a pint of milk. So he's talking in a ridiculous accent. He's got this big oxygen mask on. He's sitting in his big wheelchair. And as the journalists are pressing him, are you Nicholas Alahverdian? He'll start crying and spitting and wheezing into his oxygen mask. And he turns beet red and he fogs up his glasses. And he's going, I am not Arthur Knight. And he goes, do my legs work? And he stands up, and they obviously do work. And then he's a terrible actor. He falls back down. It looks completely fake. And his wife is going, oh no, don't stand up, Arthur. Look what you've done. You've made him cry. And the whole thing, you're staring at him, and he's in the wheelchair, my legs, and he's talking in the accent, and he's crying and spitting in his mask, and his glasses are fogged up, and you start to get the feeling, this is the guy. This is the most pathetic guy in the world. The only other person that makes me feel the way that I feel once it all comes together and hits you with Nicholas Alahverdian is Chandler Halderson. Because again, I think here's the criteria to being the most pathetic person in the world. You have to be living a complete and total lie. So like that's a Chandler Halderson, that's a Grant Amato, that's a Nicholas Alahverdian. You have to be convicted of a truly awful and embarrassing crime, right? Chandler Halderson murdered his parents to play more video games. That, I think, checks. Nicholas Alahverdian is a convicted sex offender and possibly a litigious rapist. That gets into it. And then it's the faking of the injury and also the accent, but it's the faking of the injury where you looking at Chandler Halderson pretend to have weak legs and a slow mind from his fake fall down the stairs so he could play more video games, and just watching Nicholas Alahverdian have to be picked up by his wife and plop down on the couch. The whole thing is just beyond sad. But anyway, so 10 months go by, and finally Nicholas Alahverdian's and his lawyers' only strategy is just delay, appeal, delay. And finally, the judge in Scotland said, this is Nicholas Alahverdian. The tattoos match, the fingerprints match. He is officially Nicholas Alahverdian. And hilariously, leading up to that decision, Nicholas Alahverdian said the reason he has the same tattoos of the rapist Nicholas Alahverdian is because when he was in a coma in the hospital, they brought in a tattoo artist, and while he was unconscious, tattooed him with that guy from America, which he isn't. I'm Arthur Knight. They tattooed me with the same tattoos, and that's how the tattoos happened. And everyone's like, that's the dumbest thing we have ever heard. So 10 months, and finally he is deemed, you are legally and officially Nicholas Alahverdian. So then the next big legal decision has to be, can he be extradited to the United States? That takes 8 months, and finally, 2 weeks ago, after 2 years of it just slogging pitifully slow through the Scottish justice system, finally the judge said he can be extradited to the United States. Now I've learned what has to happen from here is, so the Scottish judge, who they call a sheriff, made the official, he can be extradited. Then it goes up to a minister who, the way I understand it, just has to put the stamp of approval. Yep, I concur. I think that should be happening any day. And then I think Nicholas Alahverdian's lawyers has 28 days to appeal. You got to think they're going to use all of that, but I really don't see any roadblocks. Since 2017, he has been on the run, faking to be in a wheelchair, talking in a ridiculous accent. Also, at the beginning when he was before he was legally deemed Nicholas Alahverdian, that whole 10 months, it looked like style-wise he was dressing like an old Cambridge professor. 3-piece cocoa brown wool suits with pocket squares and cufflinks and little academia glasses. And now it looks like his style, he's going for Hasidic Jew with the black and the hat and the beard and everything. So he had like a total style shift from when he was deemed you are Nicholas Alahverdian and not Arthur Knight to the extradition part of the case. He looks like a totally different person. Still in the wheelchair, still zooming around. One time he was zooming around away from the press, and his wife, who's carrying this giant oxygen tank that he proclaims that he needs, and she dropped it and it disconnected, and they were like, you're not connected to your oxygen, are you okay? And the whole thing is just beyond ridiculous. So now, once this 28 days or just formality goes past, I think they're going to send him back. What's going to happen? Like Chandler Halderson, once he was charged and they were doing trial, he didn't pretend to have weak legs and a slow mind anymore. That all kind of just went away, but Nicholas Alahverdian is not, he's a different type. Once they get him back to the United States and his wheelchair wheels are on U.S. soil, there's no telling what he's going to do. When he was arrested for a domestic incident way back when, he threw himself on the floor and refused to move. They had to carry him. Once he finally was deemed, you are Alahverdian, you're not Arthur Knight, anytime they would refer to him as Alahverdian, he would scream at the judge, I am Arthur Knight. Once they finally were about ready to make the official decision, you can be extradited, he refused to go to court, so he appeared on a video screen, and he was just looked like to be totally unconscious, and then at one point he freaked out and they had to cut the feed. Another time, the doctor in the jail in Scotland said even though his legs don't work, he flipped out and kicked a guard in the face. And so there really is, like I said earlier, no bottom to how far he will reduce himself. The accent, the legs don't work, the giant wheelchair, which should be immediately donated to someone that needs it, the oxygen mask, keeping the story going. And what's also kind of funny is he's so litigious, he would sue his own mother for a boiled hot dog. And the thing is now that he's claiming to be Arthur Knight, when he gets back to the United States, is he going to say, all right, I am Nicholas Alahverdian? Or is he going to keep claiming that Nicholas Alahverdian is dead and he's Arthur Knight? And if that's the case, he can no longer sue anyone for saying anything about Nicholas Alahverdian, which was one of his things that he loved to do. He sued the victim that he sexually assaulted to be a sex offender. He sued her, I think multiple times. He also sued his victim's boyfriend because the boyfriend on a vlog said, yeah, this Nicholas Alahverdian dude is crazy. And Nick saw that and goes, no one calls me crazy, and sued her boyfriend. He sued all of the prosecutors that prosecute him for his sexual assault charge. He made it very clear to other women, they've come out and said, he made it very clear that if after he assaulted me, that if I went to the authorities, he would sue me and try to just dry me out in the courts and waste all my money. And then when he got to UK, this is probably one of the most horrifying stories from the whole thing. When he gets to the UK, he's trying to find a job. Arthur Knight is trying to find a job. And he puts his resume. He went to Harvard. Nicholas Alahverdian went to Harvard. So he went to one of those job application websites. He puts in his resume. He puts in his college degrees and everything, and because he went to Harvard, the website put him as like, this is one of the best candidates to hire of our whole website. So there's this Canadian woman that's got a business going, it's starting to do well, she wants to expand from Canada over to the UK, which means the business is doing well. So she wants to hire a PR person in the UK to handle PR as the expansion happens. Well, she goes onto that job website, the top candidate, Harvard grad, Nicholas Alahverdian or Arthur Knight. I don't actually know what, it's got to be Arthur Knight though. I don't know what name, but anyway, Harvard grad, wants to be hired, PR. And she's going, wow, this is amazing. Yeah, I'm going to hire the Harvard grad. That's perfect. So she hires Arthur Knight, Nicholas Alahverdian, to be her PR. Months go by. He doesn't do anything. She's like, all right, well, this isn't going well. I'm going to fire him. And she says, I'm going to let you go. You're not cutting the mustard. You're not doing anything, really. And you get to see how litigious Alahverdian is, because he goes, all right, well, if you're firing me, you better pay me the rest of our contract, the $40,000. And the woman that owns the business goes, what contract? What $40,000? What are you talking about? And then these are the texts that Nicholas Alahverdian sent to her. Because I will sue you and contact all of your customers, as I have your entire list, and anytime anyone Googles your name, they will see the results of your fraud and our lawsuit. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I left my entire client portfolio to work for you full time. Definitely didn't have a client portfolio. Either you settle or I will tell the world the truth about you online, on the news, and you will truly be, quote, famous. So I'm all ears. I am all ears for what you have to propose, or you and your father will be the target of legal and PR action beginning Monday morning. Tick tock. I mean, you can really see a window into who that man is with stuff like this, and he's a truly horrifying individual. I keep repeating myself, but there is nothing will surprise me. Once that man's wheelchair wheels are on U.S. soil, nothing is going to surprise me. He could play dead. He could pretend to be unconscious. He could pretend to still be Arthur Knight. Maybe he's going to revert back to being Alahverdian. Who knows? We're going to follow it. It's totally insane. I love you all. I'm going to cut it off there. Why? Steven Y. Shamita.